Okay, commercial conversions. So I'm going to talk to you on this video what exactly that means for us as property investors and developers. And I'm going to give you some examples of some of the projects that I've been involved in and taken right from the sourcing stage, so agreeing an option to buy a commercial property and taking it all the way through to doing the development, and also share with you some of my other projects which have been commercial conversions to apartments and student accommodation. So let's go ahead and get started. As ever, I want to get you all to smash that like button and hit the subscribe button so you get the notifications as soon as I upload a new video. Okay, so commercial conversions. What does that mean? Sounds pretty sexy, talked about a lot. I'm sure you've all seen a lot of it. So we're in simplistic terms, a commercial conversion is where we take a property which is used as an office or a shop or a pub, anything that's not residential, a barn, an industrial unit, whatever, a building that is there for commercial use, and we convert it to residential. And the reason why this has been such a hot topic in the recent years is because the government brought in something called permitted development, PD. You may hear that quite a bit. Permitted development allows a developer to convert a property of commercial use to residential with prior approval, it's called, without the need to go through the standard plan and application. You still need to submit an application of notification, and there are various things that can dictate that you can and can't do that. Lots of policy, and things have changed and moved and evolved over the years when this was first announced. So before we get into all of that detail, because we are going to touch on that, let's talk about what types of properties that you can convert. The reality is you can convert any type of property, but it all comes down to the cost. You can do anything you want with property, planning dictating, but is it always going to be commercially viable? And I think one of the biggest things that I definitely see when I'm looking at commercial deals, and I hear about when other people are in the mix of a commercial conversion, is the numbers are just not stacking up. So why would someone want to buy a property and convert it to residential? Why not just buy a house that is already converted, already people live in there? And the truth is you can, more times than none, if the deal stacks up, buy a property of a much larger square footage and create a bigger residential dwelling or more residential dwellings. And the reason why someone would consider doing this is because the cost to buy a commercial property and the cost to do the conversion may end up being cheaper than buying the residential property or number of properties that you'll create. And that's really attractive for investors who want to hold on to properties, and it's really attractive for developers because you can develop multiple units and then sell them on, very similar to building. But the entry point at the moment, because of the amount of legislation, aggression towards property investors, makes commercial properties that little bit more attractive to buy. And I'll give you one example. One is the stamp duty. So stamp duty, we've seen some huge shifts over the years. I think it was 2015, we had a little bit of a period where stamp duty was reduced, but then it jumped right back, I think 2014, sorry, then it jumped back up in 2015. And the big thing is, if you live in a property that you own and you decide to buy a second property, this is residential, there are various triggers of extra stamp duty that you must pay. And this isn't a video about stamp duty, so I'm not going to give you all of the different calculations and percentages. You can find that on the government website, but my app, the Grace Charles app, there's a video down here that shows you how to use it with a link so you can download it on an iPhone or an Android. There is a stamp duty calculator in there for residential and commercial, and it does all of the calculations for you. But to give you a really quick example, before the increase, if you bought a property for 250,000 residential, it cost you 2,500 quid in stamp duty. Today, that same property would cost you £10,000 in stamp duty. So there is a massive difference in what it was and what it is today. However, commercial property, 150,000 and below, or below 150,000, I think it is, stamp duty is zero. So to buy a similar property for 145,000, compare the apples for apples, your stamp duty is going to be massively more beneficial to buy the commercial property. So that's a huge plus point straight away. Depending on the area that you live, depending on what type of commercial property you buy, you tend to get a bit more bang for your buck. What do I mean by that? So in Norwich, which is the area that's relevant for me, and it's really the only area I can talk about, but if you look at a pound for pound basis per square foot on a residential property, and you take, say, a pub in the same residential location, you will absolutely get more square footage property for your money buying, say, a pub than you would residential. And then that makes it attractive, because if you want to convert that pub or that commercial property, you're already starting on the forefront because you're paying less for the property. However, the commercial conversions costs will obviously be a lot more than the refurb on a residential house. So this is things to consider. Okay, so we've talked about some of the reasons why you would buy a property, a commercial property. Let's get into the detail now. So buying and developing land, building properties, tends to be a much longer process than, say, a commercial conversion. And I mean this at the planning stage. Not necessarily the build out stage, because it all depends on type of site that you're building on versus the type of property you're converting. And don't be blinded that just because you're converting a property that's already sat there, it will always be cheaper and quicker than building straight out of the ground. You may have a really nice site where you're building 2 or 3 houses where there's no problems in the ground, and you're straight out and it's a straight bog standard box type dwelling, and it's done and dusted and the brickwork flies up, or it's a timber frame or whatever. And equally, you might have a land which has got contamination. It might be land which is on old drains or sewers or whatever, and the investigation into the ground, it could be contaminated, whatever, it could end up costing and taking more than the whole build would have done had you have not had these problems. So you know, land is not without its issues, and commercial property is no different. Don't think just because you're buying a commercial property like an office, you're literally just going to rock up there, stick some stud walls up, put some lights in the room, and you've got your dwellings. It's absolutely far from the truth. A lot of these buildings will have old hidden issues, asbestos being one of them. Some of these older buildings will tend to have asbestos anywhere. So I would always recommend getting an asbestos report done before you take on any commercial conversion, especially if it's a little bit older. There's also going to be things like the requirements for building regs. And if you've got a building structure already there, where the floors and everything are already defined and built, but you've got to make those compliant with soundproofing, insulation, all of those various bits and pieces, fire regs. You may run into some troubles where you have to rip ceilings down and start again. So it's not going to be that straightforward. Get it out of your head that it is going to be literally rock up, and it's going to be nice and simple. So let's talk a little bit about the detail about this permitted development, which is what really this is all about. I'm not an expert in this, and the reason being is legislation and policy is forever shifting and changing. I haven't got the time, nor have I got the attention span, and nor have I got the desire to know all of those details as they shift and change. And my interpretation may be completely wrong, so I don't want to be second guessing myself whether I've got things right or wrong, and making a purchase and an investment on a pretty large project based on my own liability. Being a successful property investor doesn't mean that you have to know the ins and outs of everything, and it doesn't mean you need to be brilliant at building. What I think most successful property investors and developers have in common is they recognize the value of professionals. They recognize the value that those people can bring with their expertise in individual fields, but more importantly, they recognize the liability is on that person, not you. So there is someone else to call upon should things go wrong. And I think not just property, any business, to take on everything, every burden on your own is wrong, and it can quickly start to unravel. I've had another business years ago And I remember trying to do absolutely everything myself, everything from selling to the accounts, to the compliance, right through to designing and printing the point of sale. It was just crazy. And then we shifted to become a franchisee, and all of that was done for you. And I realized that you can do everything yourself, but if you've got the professionals and the experts in their own fields doing it for you, not only is it done quicker and better, but the ownership is on them and the liability is on them. So let's get into the detail. So what is permitted development? Permitted development allows you to basically does what it says on the tin. It permits you to develop that property under prior approval without a full planning application. And there are specifics and there are legislations that stop you doing that, even if the building does qualify. So let's take a barn. I'm in a barn right now. It falls under permitted development. So I could buy a barn that is been used for agricultural use, that's closed in, it's not open, and I can convert it to residential. And because it's under permitted development, I don't have to tick some boxes like room sizes, some policies under amenity space and all those various things. However, there are some conditions within policy that stops me converting this barn. One of them being that this barn is grade 2 listed. So if a building is listed, it removes those permitted development rights. So unfortunately, I couldn't just rock up and start converting this. I needed planning permission, and I also needed listed building consent, which I had to go and get. And it's the same for an office building. And I'll put a picture here now of a property that we called number 1, and we always have project names for all of our projects. So we called this number 1, and this property, right for commercial conversion. It was originally built as a single dwelling, so perfect. But because it was grade 2 listed, we couldn't do it under permitted development, which was a real pain. And as you can see, it's a lovely Georgian style building. And it came on the market, and the owner, who knew me sort of indirectly, but he did know of me, so that made things a lot easier. He wanted, in my mind, what I thought was quite a high price. So we had a conversation, and I actually agreed an option on this property. What does that mean? This video isn't about options, but I'll explain what that is. It means I took control of that property and agreed the option to pay a price for it, but there was conditions attached to that, and it was getting planning permission for X number of dwellings for residential use. And that planning application had to be submitted fully, and it had to go through listed building consent. And I can tell you, planning permission wasn't too much of an issue. It did take a hell of a lot longer, and we had, I think, 4 different planners throughout the process because there were so many people leaving and what have you, which drew it out, and there was things going, they were getting things wrong, so we were having to sort of have conversations with them. But when we finally got planning permission, we had to go through the listed building consent and satisfy those conditions, which took almost another year. So these aren't easy, straightforward deals. But if it's not listed, and it meets all of the other criterias, and there isn't anything else that it breaches in terms of policy and legislation, you can take it through permitted development. There are other things to consider, proximity to some of the other buildings. If you're converting a building which is next to another commercial property, you need to consider things like noise, all sorts of things. But I'm not going to go through all of that because 1, I don't want to, 2, I don't know them all. I pick up the phone to the architect and I have a conversation with him, and it's his job to know that, and he is very good at it. And having a good architect is fundamental to these sorts of projects. So I'm going to talk to you about another project now, which I, again, secured on an option. I'm going to do a video about this project all on its own because this was an option with a planning gain, a lease, and a delayed completion, and a commercial conversion all wrapped up in one. But I'll show you a picture of what it used to look like. This was brought to me off market. It doesn't matter on and off market, I don't care as long as the deal stacks up, but it was brought to me off market. Interesting story. It's old solicitor's office, run by husband and wife team, great couple, fantastic firm. Great business. They'd outgrown this property, but they bought it in the height of the market. So there was some mortgage outstanding that wasn't quite stacking up. Anyway, long story short, it fell within permitted development. Now, Normally, a lawyer's office is classed, I think, as A2, which is the use class, not B1. So instead of guessing, I spoke to the architect and I said, look, I've got this deal, looks great for conversion, what do you think? And we established, with help of other professionals, that the first and second floor, you can see it in the picture, the first and second floor was office use, and that should be classed as B1. And we could make an application under permitted development for that very reason. And there was some argument that the ground floor equally had that use. So we made an application for the whole property, with a view that we probably wouldn't get the ground floor space, but we went for it anyway. So we went for 5 flats, 4 in the floors 1 and 2, and then 1 in the ground floor with a small shop at the front. And not only did we get the bottom floor kicked back, but we actually had an interpretation from local planning that the whole thing wasn't B1 and they were going to refuse the application. Now, we really didn't agree with that. So we made an application for an appeal because they did refuse it, and an application for costs. And I would urge anyone, if you are making an application and it's refused and you don't believe it should have been refused, always appeal it. And you will get some overturned. Not all of them, but most of them. But we were really confident on this one. And we put it through for appeal, took 12 months. And in the background, I had this lease option, which basically meant that I'd had control over the property. I agreed to pay a price for it based on us getting planning permission. But I didn't write that agreement myself. I didn't download it off the internet, and I didn't piggyback off someone else on Facebook and borrow their one. I had it drawn up by a lawyer. And in that agreement, the lawyer rightly flagged all of the variants that could happen should we not get planning permission, should we get a refusal and go to appeal. So I was well protected. I could extend this agreement because we were in appeal. We hadn't had the full final decision after refusal. But that doesn't mean that I pissed the vendors off. I had a conversation with them, and there was a trigger in there should it go beyond a certain space of time that I could pay a lease fee every month, so it would satisfy their mortgage payments. But being commercially minded, that lease fee was a contribution towards the purchase price. So I was paying it every month, which was helping their cash flow, but it was being deducted off of the final price. Now, I hear you all saying, well, what happens if you never got the planning permission down? That money is lost. Yeah, it would have been. But this is how confident you have to be in the professionals that you're working with. And because you're not doing it all on your own, you're not second guessing yourself, and you're relying on proven experts, you have to make these calls, and they help you build some of the best deals out of nothing. Anyway, we did eventually get the appeal. It overturned the decision, and we got the planning permission for the 4 flats. We didn't get it on the ground floor, which was fine. And because we got the appeal overturned on the decision of permitted development, that opened the door for us on room sizes. Now, the minimum room sizes is X, 33 square meters or whatever it is, I don't know off the top of my head. And we brought these in just below 30, so a little bit smaller, but we were able to get 4 really nice apartments. Again, I'm going to put some pictures up here, and you'll see the insides. We did them absolutely fantastic. Granite worktops, travertine floor tiles, high-end spec-deck bathrooms, lovely interior. In the description, it says designed by an interior designer, but it wasn't, it was me. So hopefully you'll agree with my choice of interior decor. I now replicate that same interior for our student houses because I like to give something a little bit nicer, and I really liked how these turned out. And we converted it to a really high standard, and they rent really well, not because of the room sizes are too small, because of how we've designed them and how we've converted them. And the ground floor property, we decided short term to take it as an office for the business, but I sold the business, and that property was then rented, and it's now rented as a commercial use on the ground floor, and we get a really good rent for it. And overall, that property is probably grossing around £60,000 per annum, which is not bad off of the purchase price. But this is all off the back of a permitted development deal and a commercial conversion. And this is a really good success story in hindsight of a successful commercial conversion. But I can tell you now, when I was arguing with the planners, going through appeals, having really difficult conversation with the vendors as to why we still hadn't got a planning permission through, there were times where I thought, is this deal really worth it? Is it going to be the great deal I believe it is going to be? I was doubting myself in the deal, but it turned out to be an absolutely fantastic. And I'll do a video titled Woolgate Court on its own about that deal. But this is about commercial conversions, and that's a really nice story about how they can work really well. And at the moment, given the recent crisis that we've just gone through, or we're going through, there is going to be more and more commercial property come onto the market, and there will be a lot of offices. So when these start coming to the market, you need to start to look at your location, and location will dictate if there is a market for this type of thing. Now, where I live, there isn't a huge amount of B1 offices. We're a retail centre for East Anglia. We have a huge amount of workforce that travel into the city every single day. And some of the biggest retailers have their biggest store in and around Norwich because we're a retail-driven economy, local economy. There are plenty of offices, but they are being used. And the ones that have been coming up more recently have been snapped up by some really big guys who are building some purpose-built student accommodation for our second university, and I'm talking 300-400 units in each one. But there definitely isn't a huge amount of commercial property available. So when it does come up, there tends to be a lot of people going for the same stuff, looking for that sort of low-hanging fruit, the headlight B1 office conversion, that sort of thing. Commercial conversions don't necessarily need to be B1 to be successful. They definitely don't necessarily need to be fully residential to be converted. And I think this is where a lot of the crowd, a lot of the masses have jumped from A to D and missed B and C. Because what is happening already, and it will speed up in its growth, is the secondary commercial market. What I mean by that is retail is primary city centres where the rents and rates are really high, where you find your top shops and I was going to say phones for you then, but they've been a long time gone. The big retailers in the city centres and in the shopping centres. This market is struggling because we are shifting. Like pubs have struggled for decades, the retailers are going to start to struggle. Because as we change our buying habits, as we go out less and do more home shopping, there's going to be less income and less warrant for businesses to be paying these large rents and rates. So primary retail isn't and has never been a focus of mine for commercial property. But in the sort of ashes, if you will, of the fires that are now coming, what comes out are the service-based businesses that need premises that people can't get online or in their own home necessarily. And I think the hairdressers, the beauticians of the world, those sorts of service businesses that need nice premises are where I like to focus. It spreads, I think, the risk, so you don't have too much with big retailers, especially if you've got really big properties with big retailers and one of them goes bust, and all of a sudden, instead of getting a really nice rental payment every quarter, you're now left with a huge rates payment. I like to keep these rates, these properties in the rateable threshold of exemption, zero business rates relief. It makes my property more attractive to those businesses that are looking to take on those properties, and you can even sometimes charge a bit more because of that. So why am I talking about this in a commercial conversion video, you might be asking? Well, I think where we're missing things and what will make things easier in terms of planning is if you can find a great commercial property, if it's B1 office permitted development or not, and convert part of it to residential, but maintain part of it as commercial, maybe make it a bit smaller, a bit more affordable, whatever. Split the units up so one large unit can become 2 or even 3 and have a mixed use. I think you have an easier ride in terms of planning because you're keeping part of it commercial, which is what they like. You get some diversity because you go commercial and residential. You're playing in 2 separate markets, so your eggs aren't all in one basket for that particular property. And you can spread your risk in terms of income for that one property. So if you have one big commercial tenant and they go bust, you lose your income for that property. If you have it all residential, say all students, and something happened to the student market, if it was all service accommodation, and something happened like it has done recently and you lose all that income, then again, it's all gone. if you split this unit up, so you've got some mix of commercial and residential, and then even maybe 2 or 3 commercial units in there, just diversifying the risk. And I think commercial conversions over the next 18 to 24 months, the focus should not be just trying to hunt down B1 offices, and if it's not a B1 office, I'm not interested in the deal. We need to start looking at where the opportunity is of commercial properties coming to the market. So it will be things like businesses that are going to shift off the back of the crisis. Maybe some businesses that thought they had to be office-based will now go more virtual working because they've been forced into that way of working now. And pubs are definitely not struggling like they once were, but they are still closing at a large rate, and there will be some really cheap stock coming to the market. And pubs represent a good example of a mixed use of commercial and residential, because the planning application will be a lot easier if you are going to keep part of it as a pub or even part of it as commercial. It will be a lot easier journey than just turning it all into residential. So lots of things to consider there. Okay guys, so that was my quick video about commercial conversions. There's lots more you can talk about with that subject, and there's lots of detail you can go into. This video isn't about the detail. It's definitely not about the legislation and policies, because they'll likely change before this video even gets published. But it's about a tool to consider when analysing a potential deal, and don't just dismiss things based on what you think is sexy and working in other people's markets. Look at your own market, look at your own location, and look at what stock's available and what's not, and what should be considered. And commercial property should be a key part of anyone's strategy, for the very nature that more and more of it is going to be coming onto the market to buy. And as more comes onto the market, it should reduce the prices down. But that's it from me, guys. If you've got any questions or any comments or any suggestions on a video that you want to hear, feel free to leave a comment at the bottom there. I'll put some links into my Instagram page and Facebook as well, so you can follow me, and I do tend to put more up on those platforms on a daily basis. But that's all from me. Don't forget to hit the like button, don't forget to hit subscribe, and I'll see you all on the next video. Catch you later.